I found an 847-page file about myself in my fiancé's father's study. It was titled Blair Sinclair, Candidate Assessment Report. For 3 years while I thought I was falling in love, I was actually being investigated, tested, and evaluated like a job applicant. They staged fake emergencies to see how I'd react. They sent attractive men to seduce me. They hired private detectives to dig through my trash. I passed every single test. And on my wedding day I made them fail theirs. My name is Blair. I'm 31 years old. And this is the story of how I almost married into one of the wealthiest families in Massachusetts, discovered I had been their lab rat for 3 years, and burned their perfect dynasty to the ground in front of 400 guests. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the woman I was before I knew my entire relationship was a performance review. I grew up middle class in a suburb of Boston. My father was a high school history teacher. My mother worked as an administrative assistant at a medical clinic. We weren't poor, but we weren't wealthy either. We lived in a 3-bedroom colonial that my parents had saved for a decade to afford. I shared a bathroom with my younger brother. I wore clothes from Target and thought Olive Garden was fine dining. I was ordinary in every way, which is exactly why the Hartwell family found me suspicious. I was a good student, driven by the knowledge that no one was going to hand me anything. I earned a scholarship to Boston University, studied architecture, graduated with honors. I worked my way up at a mid-size firm, starting as a junior drafter, eventually becoming an associate architect with my own small portfolio of projects. By 28, I was making $87,000 a year, owned a modest condo in Cambridge, and considered myself successful by any reasonable measure. I wasn't rich, but I was proud of what I had built with my own hands. Then I met Ethan Hartwell, and my ordinary life collided with extraordinary wealth. It happened at a charity gala in October 2020. I was there because my firm had donated to the cause and received complimentary tickets. I wore a dress I had bought on sale at Nordstrom Rack, the nicest thing I owned but probably the cheapest garment in the room. I felt out of place among the women in couture and the men in custom suits. I was planning to make a polite appearance, drink 1 glass of free champagne, and leave early. Ethan approached me by the bar. He was tall, dark-haired, handsome in that effortless way that comes from a lifetime of good nutrition, personal trainers, and zero financial stress. He was wearing a watch that cost more than my car. I noticed because the light caught it when he reached for his drink, a glint of gold and diamonds that announced his wealth without him saying a word. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," he said, smiling. I laughed despite myself. Is it that obvious? Only to someone who feels the same way. These events are torture. Everyone performing for everyone else. I'm Ethan, by the way. Blair. We talked for 2 hours. He was charming, self-deprecating about his family's wealth, genuinely interested in my work as an architect. He asked intelligent questions about design and urban planning. He made me feel seen in a way I hadn't expected from someone of his background. When he asked for my number at the end of the night, I gave it to him without hesitation. I didn't know his last name was Hartwell. I didn't know his family was worth $400 million, built on 3 generations of pharmaceutical manufacturing. I didn't know that the moment he expressed interest in me, I became a subject of investigation by a family that treated marriage like a merger and love like a liability. Our first date was coffee at a small cafe in Harvard Square. Ethan showed up in jeans and a sweater, driving a Honda Civic that he later told me he used specifically so women wouldn't judge him for his money. I found it endearing at the time. Now I understand it was the first of many calculated presentations designed to make me trust him. We dated for 3 months before he told me about his family. He framed it apologetically, like he was confessing a flaw rather than revealing a fortune. "I should have told you sooner," he said. "My family has money. A lot of money. I didn't want it to change how you saw me." I assured him it wouldn't. I meant it. I had fallen for the man who showed up in a Honda, who asked about my work, who seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and dreams. The money was background noise. What I didn't know was that from our very first date I was being watched. The Hartwell family had protocols for romantic relationships. I learned this later from the file, but let me explain it now so you understand the scope of what was done to me. When any member of the Hartwell family began dating someone seriously, the family's security team initiated a background investigation. This was standard, they claimed, a precaution against gold diggers and social climbers and anyone who might threaten the family fortune. But for me, the investigation went far beyond background checks. As I was nobody. Because I had no family money, no social connections, no obvious motivation for dating Ethan except genuine affection. And to the Hartwell family, that made me the most dangerous kind of threat. A woman with nothing to lose, who might actually be after their son for love, was somehow more suspicious than a socialite with transparent financial motivations. So they tested me. For 3 years they tested me. The first test came 2 months into our relationship. I received a job offer from a prestigious architecture firm in New York, completely unsolicited. The salary was $145,000, nearly double what I was making. The opportunity was incredible. Exactly the kind of career leap I had dreamed about. But it would mean leaving Boston. Leaving Ethan. I agonized over the decision for weeks. I talked to Ethan about it, expecting him to be supportive of my career. Instead, he was strangely neutral, saying he would understand whatever I decided, that he didn't want to hold me back. I interpreted this as respectful distance. Now I know it was because he already knew the outcome. The job offer was fake. His family had created it to see if I would choose money over the relationship. I turned down the offer. I called the firm to decline and the HR person seemed confused, asking questions that didn't quite make sense, like they weren't prepared for the conversation. At the time, I assumed it was just poor communication. Now I know the entire firm had been fabricated, a shell company with a fake website and a rented office space, all to test whether I could be bought. In the file, this test was labeled Financial Loyalty Assessment. I passed with a score of 94 out of 100. The 6-point deduction was because I had taken 2 weeks to decide instead of rejecting the offer immediately. The second test came 6 months later. I was at a bar with girlfriends when an attractive man approached me. He was charming, flirtatious, exactly my type if I were single. He bought me drinks. He complimented my smile. He asked if I wanted to get out of there, go somewhere quieter. I showed him the promise ring Ethan had given me, and told him I was in a committed relationship. He persisted for another 20 minutes before finally giving up. In the file, this was labeled Fidelity Assessment. Male subject approach number 1. The man was a hired actor paid $2,000 to attempt to seduce me. The entire encounter was photographed by a private investigator sitting 3 tables away. There were 14 photos in the file, time-stamped and annotated with my responses. Final assessment. Subject demonstrated strong commitment to relationship. Rejected all advances despite persistent approach. No physical contact initiated. I was so proud of myself that night for staying loyal. I had no idea my loyalty was being purchased for $2,000 and documented in a corporate-style report. There were 7 more fidelity tests over the next 2 years. Different men, different scenarios, different levels of intensity. One approached me at the gym. One pretended to be a client interested in my architectural services. One accidentally bumped into me at a coffee shop and spilled his drink on my shirt, requiring me to go to his nearby apartment to clean up. I declined every time. I rejected every advance. I passed every test. Each one was documented in the file. Photos. Transcripts of conversations recorded by hidden microphones. Assessments written by psychologists the family kept on retainer. I was being studied like a specimen, dissected like a case study, evaluated like a product under consideration for purchase. And I had no idea. The tests weren't limited to fidelity. They tested my honesty, my reaction under pressure, my family relationships, my spending habits. In year 2, Ethan's mother, Victoria Hartwell, staged a medical emergency at a family dinner. She pretended to choke, collapsed dramatically, and watched through half-closed eyes to see how I would react. I performed CPR until the paramedics arrived, paramedics who were actually hired actors. In the file, this test was labeled Crisis Response Assessment. I received a perfect score for remaining calm, taking charge, and demonstrating genuine concern for Victoria's well-being. Victoria Hartwell later told me that dinner was when she really started to like me. I accepted the compliment with gratitude. I didn't know she was complimenting my performance on a test I didn't know I was taking. They investigated my family. Private detectives interviewed my parents' neighbors, pretending to be journalists writing a story about local teachers. They pulled financial records on my brother, checking for debt or criminal history that might become a family liability. They obtained my medical records through channels I still don't understand, verifying that I was healthy enough to bear children, that I had no genetic conditions that might taint the Hartwell bloodline. There was a 4-page assessment of my reproductive viability in the file. I was 28 years old, and strangers were evaluating my uterus like it was a factory asset. My social media was monitored constantly. Every post was screenshotted and analyzed. When I posted a photo of an expensive dinner Ethan took me to, a note was added to my file. Subject shows some appreciation for luxury experiences. Continue monitoring for signs of materialism. When I posted about volunteering at a homeless shelter, another note. Subject demonstrates social consciousness. Positive indicator for public image compatibility. I was not a person to them. I was a series of data points to be collected and evaluated. The engagement came in September 2023, 3 years after we started dating. Ethan proposed at sunset on a private beach his family owned in Martha's Vineyard. He got down on one knee with a 5-carat diamond ring that I later learned cost $180,000. I said yes. I cried. I called my mother from the beach while Ethan hugged me, and she cried too. It was the happiest moment of my life. Somewhere in the Hartwell estate, a note was being added to my file. Engagement accepted. Proceed to Phase 4. Premarital evaluation. Phase 4 was even more invasive than what had come before. They hired a forensic accountant to analyze every financial transaction I had made in the past decade. They commissioned a psychological profile based on my social media activity, my public statements and interviews with people I barely knew. They conducted what the file called stress tests, manufacturing small crises to see how I handled pressure, conflict, and disappointment. One stress test involved Ethan canceling our vacation to Italy at the last minute, claiming a work emergency. I was disappointed but understanding. Score: 88 out of 100. Another involved his mother criticizing my choice of wedding venue in front of a group of family friends. I defended my choice politely but firmly. Score: 91 out of 100. Another involved a rumor being planted that I had dated a married man before Ethan. I denied it calmly, provided evidence to the contrary, and didn't lose my temper. Score: 95 out of 100. Every moment of my relationship had been scripted, observed, and evaluated. Every emotion I felt was data for someone else's spreadsheet. I found the file on March 15, 2024, exactly 1 week before my wedding. Ethan and I were spending the weekend at his parents' estate in Concord, a 12,000 square foot mansion on 15 acres of manicured grounds. The wedding was being held there, and I was meeting with the event coordinator about final details. Ethan was out golfing with his father and brothers. Victoria was at a charity luncheon. I was alone in the house except for staff, who were busy with preparations. I went to the study to find a pen. That's all. I needed to sign some documents for the florist and couldn't find a pen in the sitting room. The study was supposed to be off-limits to non-family members, but I was about to be family. I didn't think it would matter. The desk drawer was unlocked. Inside, next to a cup of expensive pens, was a manila folder with my name on it. Blair Sinclair Summary Report. I should have closed the drawer and walked away. Instead, I opened the folder. The summary report was 30 pages. It referenced a main file of 847 pages, stored in the family's secure document system. The summary included my scores on various assessments, notes on my personality traits, evaluations of my suitability as a Hartwell spouse. There were recommendations for areas of concern that should be addressed through ongoing monitoring after the marriage. I wasn't reading a love story. I was reading a business acquisition report. I was the acquisition. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the pages. I felt sick, physically ill, like I might vomit on the antique carpet. But I kept reading. I needed to know everything. The summary referenced the fake job offer. It referenced the men hired to seduce me. It referenced the medical emergency at dinner. It referenced my parents being investigated, my medical records being obtained, my social media being monitored. It referenced psychological evaluations I had never consented to, conducted by professionals I had never met, based on data I had never knowingly provided. The final page was a recommendation letter, signed by someone called the Family Assessment Director, addressed to Charles and Victoria Hartwell, Ethan's parents. The letter concluded, "Based on 3 years of comprehensive evaluation, Blair Sinclair is approved as a suitable candidate for marriage into the Hartwell family. She demonstrates strong moral character, financial disinterest, emotional stability, and genuine affection for Ethan. She passed all fidelity assessments with exceptional scores. Her family background presents no significant liabilities. Her reproductive health is excellent. She is unlikely to seek divorce or make excessive financial demands in the event of marital dissolution. Recommendation: proceed with wedding as planned." I had been approved. Like a loan application. Like a job candidate. Like a product passing quality control. I took photos of every page with my phone. Then I found the computer in the study, used Ethan's password that I knew from years of intimacy, and located the full 847-page file in the family's cloud storage. I downloaded it to a USB drive I found in the desk. I put everything back exactly as I had found it, and I walked out of the study knowing that my wedding, my relationship, and my entire understanding of the past 3 years had been a lie. I didn't confront Ethan that night. I didn't confront anyone. I went to our room claiming a headache and spent 6 hours reading the complete file while Ethan slept beside me. Every page was worse than the last. Every detail revealed another violation. Every assessment reminded me that I had never been a partner. I had been a project. I learned things about myself that I hadn't known. The psychologist believed I had mild abandonment anxiety, stemming from my parents' emotional distance during childhood. They recommended that Ethan use reassurance strategies to manage this anxiety and maintain my emotional dependence on the relationship. They literally provided scripts for him to follow, specific phrases designed to manipulate my attachment patterns. I learned that my promotion at work 2 years ago had been engineered by the Hartwells. They had contacted a board member at my firm, a distant social connection, and recommended me for advancement. They wanted me to feel successful and independent, the file explained, so I wouldn't appear to be marrying Ethan for money. My career accomplishment was a prop in their staging. I learned that my best friend Megan had been interviewed without my knowledge. She had thought she was talking to a journalist writing about women in architecture. Instead, she had been providing character references to private investigators. The file included a transcript of the interview and a note. Friend appears loyal but indiscreet. Monitor communications for potential leaks. I learned that Ethan had been involved in every decision. He had approved the fake job offer. He had signed off on the fidelity test. He had provided information that helped the investigators know where I would be and when. The man I loved had been complicit in my surveillance from the very first day. The sun came up on March 16th, and I still hadn't decided what to do. Part of me wanted to run, to pack my bags and disappear, to escape from these people who had treated me like livestock being evaluated for breeding potential. Part of me wanted to scream at Ethan, to demand explanations, to hear him try to justify what had been done. Part of me wanted revenge. The Revenge Part 1. I had 1 week until the wedding. 400 guests were flying in from around the world. The Hartwell family had spent $2.3 million on a ceremony designed to showcase their dynasty. There would be senators, CEOs, old money families who had known the Hartwells for generations. The wedding wasn't just a marriage. It was a statement of power and prestige. It was the most important social event of the year. And I was going to use it to destroy them. I spent the next 6 days in careful preparation. I acted completely normal around Ethan and his family, attending dinners, finalizing wedding details, posing for engagement photos that would never be displayed. I smiled when Victoria complimented my dress. I kissed Ethan goodnight and told him I loved him. I performed the role of eager bride so perfectly that no one suspected anything was wrong. Meanwhile, I was building my case. I contacted a lawyer, a woman named Patricia Chun who specialized in privacy law and had a reputation for taking on powerful families. I showed her the file. She was quiet for a long time after reviewing it. "This is one of the most extensive invasions of privacy I've ever seen," she said. "They obtained medical records illegally. They conducted surveillance without consent. They manipulated your career under false pretenses. You have grounds for multiple lawsuits." "I don't want lawsuits," I said. "I want something else." I told her my plan. She tried to talk me out of it, warning me about defamation risks, about the Hartwell family's resources, about the scorched earth tactics wealthy people use against those who embarrass them. I listened to every warning. Then I told her to prepare the legal documents anyway. I also hired my own investigator. In 6 days he uncovered things the Hartwell file hadn't mentioned. He found that the family assessment director, who had approved my candidacy, was also the director of security for the Hartwell Pharmaceutical Company, suggesting they use corporate resources for personal investigations. He found payments to the actors who had tried to seduce me, traceable to a Hartwell family account. He found evidence that the medical records had been obtained through bribery of a hospital employee. The Hartwells hadn't just violated my privacy, they had committed crimes. The wedding was scheduled for March 22, 2024. 387 guests had confirmed attendance. The ceremony would be held in the estate's formal garden, followed by a reception in a tent that covered half an acre. There would be a 12-piece orchestra, a 5-course dinner, and a champagne toast with bottles that cost $400 each. I got dressed that morning in my $28,000 wedding gown, a custom creation that Victoria had insisted on paying for. I let the makeup artist paint my face. I let the hairstylist arrange my hair. I looked in the mirror and saw a beautiful bride, a woman on the happiest day of her life. Only I knew that my heart was ice. The ceremony started at 4 p.m. I walked down the aisle on my father's arm, past rows of wealthy strangers who had come to witness a Hartwell wedding. Ethan stood at the altar, handsome in his tuxedo, smiling at me with what I once believed was love. Victoria sat in the front row, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Charles Hartwell nodded approvingly, like a CEO watching a successful product launch. The officiant began the ceremony. We exchanged vows, words I had written believing they were true, words Ethan had probably had reviewed by the family assessment team. We were approaching the moment of I do, the moment when I would legally bind myself to a man who had surveilled me like a suspect, manipulated me like a target, evaluated me like an appliance. Do you, Blair, take Ethan to be your lawfully wedded husband? I looked at Ethan. I looked at his parents. I looked at the 400 guests who had gathered to witness the expansion of the Hartwell dynasty. And I smiled. No, I said. I don't. The silence was absolute. 400 people held their breath. Ethan's face went pale. Victoria's handkerchief froze halfway to her eyes. Before I continue, I said, turning to address the guests, I'd like to share something with all of you. 3 days ago, I discovered a file in this house. File about me. An 847-page evaluation of my suitability to marry into this family. I pulled a folded document from the bodice of my dress, a summary I had printed specifically for this moment. For 3 years, while I thought I was building a relationship based on love and trust, the Hartwell family was conducting an investigation. They staged fake job offers to test if I could be bought. They hired men to try to seduce me. They obtained my medical records to evaluate my reproductive viability. They had me psychologically profiled without my consent. They monitored my social media, investigated my family, and documented every moment of my life. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. People were looking at each other, at the Hartwells, at me. Cameras that had been recording a wedding were now recording something else entirely. Ethan knew about all of it, I continued. He approved the tests. He provided information to the investigators. He read the psychological profiles and used them to manipulate my emotions. The man I thought I loved was running a 3-year audition without telling me I was performing. Ethan stepped forward, his face red. Blair, stop. You don't understand. It's just how things are done. Every family has to protect itself. It wasn't personal. It wasn't personal. I turned to face him directly. You had men try to seduce me to see if I would cheat. You had your mother fake a medical emergency to see how I'd react. You manipulated my career to make me look more independent. You read reports about my psychological vulnerabilities and used them to keep me attached to you. How is that not personal? Victoria stood up. Blair, dear, perhaps we should discuss this privately. This is clearly a misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I said. I read every page. I know about the bribery to obtain my medical records. I know about the corporate resources used for personal investigations. I know that what you did wasn't just invasive. It was criminal. The word criminal sent a visible shiver through the Hartwell family. Charles Hartwell, who had remained silent until now, stood up with the authority of a man who had never been challenged. "Young lady," he said coldly, "you're making allegations you can't support. I suggest you think carefully about your next words. This family has resources you can't imagine, and we will use every one of them to destroy you if you continue down this path." I had been waiting for that threat. I had been counting on it. "I appreciate the warning," I said, "but I've already provided copies of the file to 3 different law firms, 2 investigative journalists, and a federal prosecutor who has expressed interest in the medical records bribery. Whatever you do to me now, the truth is already out there." Charles Hartwell's face went from red to white. He sat down heavily, like a man who had just been told his empire was crumbling. I turned back to the guests. "I'm sorry you all traveled so far for a wedding that isn't happening, but I thought you should know what kind of family the Hartwells really are. They don't see people as people. They see us as assets to be evaluated, risks to be managed, problems to be controlled. They treated me like a specimen for 3 years, and they would have continued treating me that way for the rest of my life." I removed the 5-carat engagement ring from my finger and placed it on the altar. "Thank you for the education, Ethan. I learned a lot about myself from your file. I learned that I'm loyal, honest, stable, and resilient. I passed every test you threw at me, but you failed the only test that mattered. You failed to be a human being." I walked back down the aisle, past the stunned guests, past my crying mother, past the orchestra that didn't know whether to play. I walked out of the garden, out of the estate, out of the life I had almost locked myself into. My father followed me, confused but supportive. My brother met us at the gate with a car. We drove away from the Hartwell estate, and I never looked back. The aftermath was everything Patricia Chun had warned me about, and also everything I had hoped for. The Hartwells tried to control the narrative. They released statements calling me mentally unstable, claiming I had fabricated the file, suggesting I was a gold digger who had been exposed and was now seeking revenge. Their PR team worked overtime to spin the story, but I had the receipts. Literally. The investigative journalists I had contacted published the story within a week, complete with excerpts from the file, documentation of the payments to actors, and evidence of the medical records bribery. The story went viral. "Billionaire family runs 3-year investigation on son's fiancé" was the headline that ended the Hartwell reputation. The federal prosecutor moved forward with charges related to the medical records. A hospital employee was arrested for accepting $15,000 in bribes. The family assessment director was named as an unindicted co-conspirator. Charles Hartwell was forced to resign from 2 corporate boards to avoid further scrutiny. The pharmaceutical company's stock dropped 12% in a single day as investors worried about what other unethical practices might be uncovered. Victoria Hartwell retreated from public life entirely. The woman who had chaired charity galas and hosted senators couldn't show her face at the country club without whispers following her. Her social empire, built over 30 years, collapsed in 30 days. Ethan tried to contact me multiple times. Texts, calls, emails, even a handwritten letter delivered to my parents' house. He said he was sorry. He said he had never wanted to hurt me. He said he loved me and the tests were just a formality, something his family required, something he had gone along with because he didn't know how to refuse. I never responded. His apologies were just more data points in a file I no longer cared about. I filed civil lawsuits against the Hartwell family, the investigators they hired, and the hospital employee who had sold my medical records. The cases took 18 months to resolve. The Hartwells settled for $4.2 million, rather than face a public trial that would have exposed even more details of their surveillance operation. The hospitals settled separately for $800,000. After legal fees, I received approximately $3.1 million. The money wasn't the point, but it helped. I quit my job at the architecture firm, the job the Hartwells had helped me get, and started my own practice. I specialize in affordable housing design now, creating homes for people who have never had anyone evaluate their reproductive viability or their financial loyalty. I design spaces for humans, not assets. I've been in therapy for 2 years, working through the psychological impact of discovering that 3 years of my life were staged. The betrayal trauma is real. The difficulty trusting new relationships is real. The hypervigilance, the constant checking for signs of deception, the fear that everyone around me might be performing, it's all real and it's all exhausting. But I'm getting better. I'm learning to trust again, carefully, with appropriate boundaries. I'm learning that what the Hartwells did says everything about them and nothing about me. I'm learning that passing their tests doesn't make me valuable. I was always valuable. They just couldn't see it without a spreadsheet. I think about Ethan sometimes. Not with love, not anymore, but with something like pity. He was raised in a family that reduced love to metrics and marriage to mergers. He never learned how to have a real relationship because his family taught him that relationships were transactions. He's a victim too, in a way. But his victimhood doesn't excuse his participation in my violation. I think about Victoria, who probably went through the same evaluation process when she married Charles 40 years ago. I think about generations of Hartwell spouses who were tested and approved and monitored, who lived their entire marriages knowing they were being watched, who raised children to continue the cycle. The Hartwell dynasty wasn't built on love. It was built on control. And control eventually always crumbles. If you're listening to this story and something feels familiar, if your partner's family seems too interested in your background, if opportunities appear too conveniently, if you sometimes feel like you're being watched or tested, I want you to trust that feeling. The people who investigate their children's partners often justify it as protection, as prudence, as reasonable precaution in a dangerous world. But there's nothing reasonable about treating another human being as a risk to be managed. Love is not an audit. Marriage is not a merger. Relationships are not transactions to be evaluated and approved by assessment committees. If someone can't trust you without a file full of evidence, they can't trust you at all. And if they can't trust you, they can't love you. Not really. Not in any way that matters. I passed every test the Hartwell family threw at me. Every fidelity assessment, every stress test, every crisis response evaluation. I scored 94 out of 100, 91 out of 100, 95 out of 100. By their own metrics, I was an exceptional candidate for marriage. But I'm not a candidate. I'm a person. And the moment I remembered that, I became free. My name is Blair Sinclair. For 3 years I was investigated, tested, and evaluated by a family that saw me as an asset to be acquired. They documented my loyalty, my honesty, my emotional stability. They approved me for marriage like a board approving a budget. On my wedding day, in front of 400 guests, I said no. I exposed what they had done. I walked away from $400 million and never regretted it for a second. They thought they were testing me. They were wrong. I was testing them. And they failed in every way that matters. The Hartwell family had resources, power, and a dynasty that stretched back generations. They had everything except the one thing they couldn't buy: my consent. I took it back on the altar. And I've never felt richer.